On November 16, 1907, many people celebrated as Oklahoma joined the United States of America. However, it was a much different story for the tribal nations of Indian Territory. In this Cherokee Almanac, we examine Oklahoma's path to statehood and its complicated and even devastating effects on the Cherokee Nation. In the 1890s, following the Oklahoma Land Run, thousands of non-Indian settlers began moving into Indian Territory and the bordering unassigned lands that formed Oklahoma Territory. The United States government began to push for Oklahoma statehood and the incorporation of Indian Territory, and therefore the Cherokee Nation, into this new state.
The Cherokee Nation was divided on the statehood issue. Some people welcomed statehood, but the majority of the Cherokee people saw it as the demise of the Cherokee Nation, and that their lives would never be the same. And indeed, this was the case in many instances.
Despite protest from several tribal nations, including the Cherokees, U.S. Congress passed the Curtis Act of 1898, asserting their authority over the nations of Indian Territory.
I think we can safely say that through most United States history, there is always an attempt to get rid of Indian people and Indian sovereignty. And so really by the 1890s, we're full on defending constantly against pressures to move towards statehood. And there are constantly bills moving through Congress that essentially push to that end.
In the looming inevitability of statehood, leaders from Indian Territory searched for a way to retain their sovereignty.
There's a push for Indian Territory to become its own separate state. And in the convention, they stated that it would be named Sequoia. So they actually set out the counties. Everything was set up under this constitutional convention as to what the state would be like.
Unfortunately, the U.S. government disregarded this proposal entirely.
There was a push to join the territories for politics, for the political ramifications within the larger United States. And had they split Oklahoma Territory and Indian Territory into two separate states, it would have brought in two new states with the same governing party. And President Roosevelt was never going to let that happen. There was never any real serious consideration of bringing two states into the mix. It was going to be one or none.
Oklahoma Statehood Day was set for November 16, 1907. Celebrations were planned among the U.S. settlers in Oklahoma Territory, but it was a very different story in Indian Territory.
My dad said, when I was 6 years old, he said, I barely remember it, but I do remember being in Tahlequah with a lot of other Cherokees. We were at the Capitol building, the Capitol Square. He said no one was talking. No one was saying anything. He said, and I heard church bells going off on the hill above, and a wagon had come on to the square, pulled by a couple of horses. White men jumped out and began unloading books that were in the wagon and carrying them into the Capitol building. And he said, and my mother pointed to the back of the Capitol building, and there was another wagon back there that apparently had come up at the same time almost, on the other direction. And there were Cherokee men there, and they were loading stuff into the wagons. People began to walk away. And he said, I remember hearing women weeping very softly, men walking away with their heads down. Nothing was said, nothing was spoken. Everyone walked away and there was crying. He said, in years after, I asked my mom, who would be my grandmother, what that was. What was that that we were at? She said, that was Statehood Day, 12 noon, when Oklahoma became a state. And the men in front were unloading American law books and taking them in. And the men at the back of the courthouse were loading up the Cherokee law books taking them out of the Capitol building. We had just lost our country again. And the people you saw had come to witness the taking of that once again. After statehood, we had no control, we had no say-so over things. But we did have say-so over our own homes and our own communities. And that lasted for a long time. That's the society I come from. That's the culture, that's the community I come from. Vibrant, working communities where we all helped each other, where we all depended upon each other for everything. We controlled that. We controlled our culture there, and that's all we had left.
To this day, the Cherokee Nation continues to struggle with the ramifications of Oklahoma statehood, but the strength of our cultural identity has persisted, and today we stand strong as a sovereign nation